right? And in period two, you can, just moving through chronologically, if you were to write this paper, you would talk about perhaps um, the decline of the Roman Empire, the western part of the Roman Empire, and the rise of Christianity during the declining years of the Roman Empire, and some supporting evidence or details, historical facts that you'll want to discuss in this period are, these should pertain to these subtopics such as the Roman Empire in decline and how that also meant a decline in oral tradition, and how, and the conflict and the tension between, because at this time, Roman Empire was, of course, traditionally a pagan society, but you all know that Jesus lived during this time, roughly speaking, and the early, of course, Christianity in its infancy was a prosecuted system of belief. But anyway, there is evidence, historical evidence, that pagans and early Christians had a contentious relationship. Okay, so you can describe, if you were in this period, you would describe, these types of conflicts and these kinds of tensions, and how eventually Christianity as a whole overcame the conflict and really came out of that the quote unquote winners, for example. So you could kind of trace the rise of Christianity within the context of the written language, and how their rise could be attributed to how they view writing as a form of language, and the general importance that they placed on writing as a tool for writing down their messages, their beliefs, and as a way to also spreading their beliefs, right? And how, so these are some major ideas that you want to unpack in this period, for example. And then moving on to chronologically, you may have a third period in your overall history. And this third period, of course, if we're using the same example, it would recount the triumph of Christianity, and within the specific context of this paper, how that could translate to the rise of punctuation, and some of the major points that you need to describe in more details. Um, in this period is how Christianity spread throughout Europe beyond the boundaries of the Roman Empire, and how their spreading, right, could not be separated from the revival of the punctuation effort, because Christianity, to spread its messages and to gain um, and to gain more supporters and believers, they had to have seen the written form of language as a way to, get to people from faraway places, and as a way to capture their interest and to hold their interest and so forth, right? So as a result of this goal, of this mission, of course, um, there were evidence of efforts from the early Christians to reform writing, uh, and to develop, new practices in writing, such as putting spaces between words so that the words could be easily read, easily recognized by readers, so that they wouldn't be, by readers, and also inserting marks or symbols that we eventually call punctuation, as a way to guide readers through the text, telling them, where one sentence ends, where one idea ends, and another one begins. So all of these are efforts that are meant to make reading a written text an easier experience, right? And others specific details that you want to describe in the history of this period is how individuals in the ecclesiastical order, such as your monks and your clerks and your priests and so forth, reused and expanded on old punctuations and how they also created new marks. All of this as a part of effort, to reform writing, to invent writing, to retool writing. And you also want to explain why motivations. And, we talked about that, right? And you can have a fourth period, right? Where, to follow through the history, you talk about how punctuation marks are further extended through the Renaissance period, different and how punctuation symbols were also inspired by other form of art, such as music notes and music notations and so forth. Um, and you might also want to describe, invention of new marks that could be recognizable today, or that would be the ancestors of modern day new marks such as question mark. Okay, and of course, if your history of your topic is covers um, a pretty long or extensive timeline, then you may have a fifth period, a sixth period, and so forth. Okay, so the sources will not tell you how to divide up, your history. It is up to you when you're looking at, all of these details, all of these historical accounts. It is up to you to organize the chronology within two different but coherent sections, right? And like I said, each section should be defined by um, each section should be defined by important details or practices, or just development important changes from from the preceding period, for example. Okay, so chronological order is the logical organizational pattern that you should choose, and then after that you have a conclusion paragraph. Unlike the introduction, for this paper, which can include, which can be more than one paragraph. You can have 2 or 3 paragraphs for the introduction, but the conclusion um, should be should be conveyed only in one paragraph in this case, but this because the conclusion doesn't really say anything essential or new. Okay, if you think back to the lecture on the purpose of the conclusion, it is to, of course, summarize the major points, to look ahead, to convey insightful, thoughtful comments about your topic and so forth. For the paper, you want to do all of that as well. You want to state, very, very briefly the effects of the history on modern day in whatever ways. You want to also You might want to also concisely, briefly explain how modern day concepts are influenced by this history, right? And you also want to briefly look ahead to the future. Where do you see this going? This is going. You've already looked through the past and you've seen the changes that took place, that were developed in the past and eventually took place and became the norm, right? Well, of course, history doesn't change. We are making history as we speak, okay? So where do you think your topic is going? In what direction? In what way? Just very, very briefly, in maybe 1 or 2 sentences, all right? And then finally, right, attached to your essay should be a separate page that is your works cited page. You need to include a works cited page with full documentation of all the sources used in your research paper. As a research paper, it must have a works cited page. If you do not cite your sources fully in a works cited page, you will incur an automatic 10-point deduction from your research paper's grade. So please keep that in mind. It is very, very important. Okay, be ethical and also be reminded that you need to document your each and every time you use a source in your paper. You also need to fully document it in a separate works cited page. So let's say your research paper runs 6 pages long. Okay, then you need to provide a 7th page, right? That would be the works cited page, and it will, of course, alphabetize the documentation of the sources that you've used. On my website, I do have a sample, a works cited page sample. So you might want to look at that to see how it is formatted and how the sources are presented. All right, any questions? Email me.